Hi, it's Taylor T. Carlson, and I'm back with another video for you. Going back to the world of classic film today, we're going to be taking a look at Ben-Hur. When people think of Ben-Hur, they usually think of the 1959 film directed by William Wyler, starring Charlton Heston, which won 11 Academy Awards and is regularly regarded as one of the greatest films ever made. But did you know that this story, based on a novel from the late 19th century by General Lew Wallace, has actually been made into a film 6 times, and that the Charlton Heston version is actually the third filmed version? Startling, isn't it? The story has been adapted for many forms of media over the years, including stage plays and musicals. The 6 versions of the movie are a 1907 short silent film, a 1925 feature-length silent film, the 1959 film starring Charlton Heston, a 2003 animated version in which Charlton Heston came back to voice the character and to narrate, a 2010 miniseries version, and a 2016 feature film. Of these stories, of these different versions of the tale of Judah Ben-Hur, which one is the absolute best? I'm also not taking into consideration accuracy to the original novel here because, as much as I hate to admit it, I've never actually read the book. That's something I do intend to correct as soon as possible, but in the meantime, why don't we go ahead and get started? At number 6, at the absolute bottom of this list, of course, we have the 1907 short silent version. The story of Ben-Hur is an epic. It's a lengthy novel, and all of the film adaptations, for the most part, are pretty lengthy to suit the story's epic stream. Is 15 minutes enough time to tell this story? Absolutely not. And that's why this version comes in dead last. Essentially, this whole movie is pretty much people in Roman centurion costumes and togas just walking around against backdrops with intertitle cards that pop up to actually tell the story. At one point, we're told that Judah Ben-Hur is sentenced to the galleys, and at another point, just a few seconds later, we're said that he rescued Quintus Arrius, and now he's this hero who's a citizen of Rome. Never once do they actually show the galleys, and perhaps as even more of a sin, in every sense of the words, they never once show or reference Jesus. A story that was originally subtitled A Tale of the Christ cannot completely omit Jesus. It's one of the most pivotal scenes in the film, and I don't think they even bother saying whatever happens to Judah's mother and sister in this version. This is definitely a product of its era. I admire them for trying to film a chariot race, at least. Granted, there's not much to say here, but if you can miss out on any one of the filmed versions of Ben-Hur, it's definitely this one. Don't go out of your way to see it. At number 5 on our list, we have the 2003 animated adaptation in which Charlton Heston serves as narrator and also came back to voice Judah Ben-Hur. This version only runs about 80 minutes, and the animation is honestly pretty low-grade, direct-to-video fare, and there's some really terrible-looking primitive CGI sequences. Charlton Heston is great as the narrator, but pushing 80 when this came out, he was far too old to be voicing the character of Judah Ben-Hur, who was presumably in his 20s. This would prove to be Charlton Heston's final acting role prior to his death in 2008. Another problem with this version of the story is it tries to shoehorn in a lot of other stuff from the Bible that's in no other version of the story of Ben-Hur. I understand these stories are sacred to people of many religions, but the fact is, these elements are just simply irrelevant to the plot, and they do nothing to advance the story. The movie does try a few different things here and there, including a slightly more optimistic ending for Masala, but ultimately I have to say that this version is pretty forgettable, and there's a reason it doesn't really get talked about all that much. At number 4 on our list, we have the 2016 feature film adaptation. This movie doesn't have a whole lot of big-name stars, but it does feature Morgan Freeman in the role of Sheik Ilderim, and he also, in true Morgan Freeman fashion, also serves as the narrator who speaks the opening prologue. The expanded role for Ilderim is easily the best thing about this version of the story. They tried to make a few changes here and there, which is understandable given how many times this story has been filmed, but ultimately it just comes off as kind of dull and doesn't really add as much to the story as you would like. I mean, it does go into detail about how many of the zealots wanted to do away with Rome for their harsh treatment, and it somewhat changes the way that Judah Ben-Hur ultimately gets sentenced to the gallows, but then it makes a lot of other changes that really don't do much favor for the story, including pretty much almost entirely eliminating the character of Quintus Arrius and how he adopts Ben-Hur following the ordeal at sea and the pirate attack. For the rest of the movie, it just doesn't really do that much. Again, I like how they tried to expand on the character of Messala a little bit, including his time before he went away to fight in the wars, but ultimately this version seems more concerned with spectacle and violence than it does in telling a human story. It could have been worse, but ultimately it's not something I'm going to find myself rushing back to too terribly often. At number 3 on our list, we have the 2010 miniseries, which aired on television. I really didn't know anything about this version of the story coming in, and it actually pleasantly surprised me in a few ways. It actually does have some parts of the story that focus on Judah Ben-Hur and Messala as children, and it does deal a little with Messala and how he initially resents having to go away to do his part to serve Rome, but then how that ultimately changes him later on. It does have a little more content in regard to his character, as well as that character's relationship with his estranged father. This version of the story tends to be a little more gritty and grounded than the other versions, and this version actually surprised me in that it has nudity, which I assume was cut out when the story aired on TV in America originally. And overall, I was not a fan of the fact that they tried to downplay the role of Christ in this version. There's no opening scene with the 3 wise men, no scene of Christ on the cross near the end. But overall, I do admire this version for trying something a little different. It does add a few new characters, and even if I don't fully agree with what all those characters bring to the story, I would say that this is at least better than the versions of the movie I did rank lower on this list. However, there are better filmed versions of the story of Ben-Hur. At number 2 on our list, we have the 1925 feature-length silent version of the story. I first saw this when it was a bonus feature included with the 1959 version, and I went in not really expecting all that much, but I was blown away and pleasantly surprised by how epic this silent version is. It runs 2.5 hours, so maybe about an hour shorter than the 1959 version, but pretty much all the elements of the story are there. It takes its time fleshing out the characters and telling the story, and it's got an epic galley sequence and battle at sea. It has an epic chariot race, which was even an influence on the 59 version. William Wyler, who was the director of the 59 version, actually served as an assistant director on this version of the film. It's presented monochrome with tinted sequences, although there are a few colored sequences throughout. Being a silent film, there are a few scenes where the acting is slightly exaggerated and over the top, but overall, I think this is easily one of the best versions of this story that's ever been told. It's also the only one of the filmed versions which features the character of Iris from the novel, who did not appear in any of the other feature film adaptations, although her ultimate fate and role here do differ slightly from the source material. And of course, the ultimate filmed version of the story of Judah Ben-Hur is the 1959 version, directed by William Wyler and starring Charlton Heston. This film was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, and it won 11 of them. Charlton Heston gives the performance of his career as Judah Ben-Hur, and it's got a fantastic supporting cast, including Stephen Boyd as Messala and Jack Hawkins as Quintus Arrius. The movie, because of its length, really gets to take its time fleshing out the characters and telling the story, and I appreciate that there's a nice balance between action and drama here. This movie's chariot race is one of the most famous filmed sequences of all time in any movie, and even 60 years later, it still looks amazing. It's an epic amongst epics, and the score by Miklos Rosa is one of the greatest film scores ever composed for any film. If you want to see the story of Ben-Hur and you only have time to watch one of the filmed versions, this is absolutely the one to see. Have you seen all of these filmed versions of Ben-Hur? Which ones have you seen or haven't you seen? What's your favorite? What's your least favorite? Let me know down in the comments section below what you think. Like this video if you found it helpful, and remember to subscribe to my channel for more reviews. I'm Taylor T. Carlson, and I will see you in my next video.